Renault was excluded from the Japanese Grand Prix following a protest by rival team Racing Point, which accused it of using a preset, lap distance dependent, brake bias adjustment system. Daniel Ricciardo lost 6th place, with Nico Hülkenberg stripped of 10th a week and a half after the race at Suzuka following an FIA investigation. But the detail of the case shows that it's a little more complicated than simply a question of innocent or guilty, as not all of Racing Point's allegations were proved. What was claimed and investigated? The FIA's investigation was rigorous, including the initial claim from Racing Point and supplementary evidence that was submitted 3 days after the Japanese Grand Prix. Renault also put together in-depth documentation that defended its systems. The FIA technical department also conducted its own comprehensive analysis of Renault's data and software to produce a written report that was submitted to the stewards. According to the FIA, an ex-Renault employee suggested to Racing Point that such a system was in use. Racing Point also claimed Renault onboard video showed brake bias settings changing on the steering wheel without driver input. It was argued that Renault was in violation of the sporting regulations, which demand a driver drives the car alone and unaided, and the technical regulations that outlaw powered devices that alter brake balance or any system not controlled by the driver. However, Renault insisted that its brake bias adjustment system did not use a lap distance trigger and was within the technical regulations, with in-depth details shared with the FIA but not released to the public. What was the FIA's verdict? After the FIA's investigation, Japanese Grand Prix stewards found that Renault's rear brake controller software was in compliance with the technical rules and was not preset and lap distance dependent as alleged. Instead, they confirmed the drivers do use buttons mounted on the steering wheel to control brake bias as per the rules. But the stewards did conclude that while Renault used innovative solutions to exploit certain ambiguities in the technical regulations and other sporting documents, their system does not breach any current technical regulation. Despite accepting Renault had exploited some grey areas, this all means that the stewards did not find Renault guilty of breaching any of the 3 specific technical regulations Racing Point cited. However, because the brake balance adjustment system saves the driver from having to make a number of adjustments during a lap, the stewards ruled it does act as a driver aid and therefore contravenes Article 27.1 of F1's sporting regulations. They also noted that the penalty is more severe than in other cases involving Article 27.1 after an assessment of the relative benefits of the breaches. Alfa Romeo drivers Kimi Räikkönen and Antonio Giovinazzi were given 30-second penalties after contravening the regulation with the use of driver aids at the start of the German Grand Prix earlier this year, which cost them points but stopped short of the disqualification Renault has been hit with. Ricciardo and Hülkenberg were therefore disqualified from the Suzuka race because it was felt they had gained a clear advantage from the system. As a result, Charles Leclerc regains the 6th place he initially lost for a 15-second post-race penalty, while Racing Point's Lance Stroll and Toro Rosso's Daniel Kvyat take up the final 2 points positions. How does this impact Renault? The consequences for Renault are serious, as it all but ensures it will not achieve its objective of finishing 4th in the Constructors' Championship for a 2nd year in a row, given McLaren is now 43 points ahead with 4 races to go. It also puts Renault under pressure from Toro Rosso, just 6 points behind, and Racing Point, a further 4 down, in the battle for 5th. Ricciardo and Hülkenberg also slipped to 12th and 13th in the Drivers' Championship, falling back behind McLaren's Lando Norris and Daniel Kvyat. So Renault's 2019 season will almost certainly represent a regression from 2018. That is bad news for a big money operation that had targeted closing the gap to Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull this year, but will instead fail even to match its previous results. It is also worth noting Renault's previous spell in F1 as a works team ended after the scale of the Singapore crash scandal came to light in 2009. While disqualification from the Japanese Grand Prix is hardly as severe, another rules controversy, after a season of disappointing results, is unlikely to play in the F1 team's favour. Renault has until 10 AM Mexico City time on Thursday, October 23rd to decide whether or not to appeal the decision, having said immediately after the verdict that it was considering doing so given the subjectivity of considering such a system a driver aid and the variability of recent penalties for such offences.